This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Okay, so when you see a title like this, you immediately kind of got to step back a bit and go like, okay, is this the best Disney villain song forever throughout all time in existence? I don't know, but what I can say is that it's definitely the best one so far, and if what Disney's been putting out lately is any indication, it's the best we're going to get for the foreseeable future. I will say though that this is my absolute favorite Disney villain song, and that's because it does something that I'm not sure any other Disney villain song does. Hellfire manages to demonstrate how Frollo thinks in the way that it was written. Like, I know he's literally screaming how he feels into a fireplace, but it's like, let's just get into it. But first and foremost, if you're going to talk about Hunchback on the internet, you first have to realize that a lot of people have already said a lot of things about it. For example, if you're interested in the music theory of the film, you have to check out Brett Bowles, who has all these little shorts that go over some of the really cool things that the score does in the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Music Theater Theory also has a video analyzing the score to Hunchback, and Nagase has a video analyzing the whole soundtrack as well. If you're more interested in like a leitmotivic analysis, then you have to check out Anto Serrano's video, where he does a good job at documenting all the leitmotifs in the score. But if you're more into like the literary aspects of the film, then you have to check out For Shame's video on why Hellfire in particular is a masterpiece, as well as Cinema Overanalyzed, and of course Mason IDK's video that goes into incredible depth about the significance of Hellfire within the context of like Frollo and his character's journey throughout the story. And then if that's not enough, you have to check out Shafrillis' video on why Frollo is actually too evil. And even if you want to know what I think, you can actually check out my thoughts on the film and the German stage version, or Der Glockner von Notre Dame, when I was on the Cheese Wheel podcast. Then there's also Disney Magic Fanatic, Lindsay Ellis, Musical Hell Tune, Listening to the Movies, Caitlin Cares Too Much, and Pixel Playhouse, who all have their own insights on not just Hunchback of Notre Dame, but the score as well as countless others that aren't necessarily about the music or the story, but are still really interesting insights to the world of Hunchback of Notre Dame, on top of the dozens and dozens and dozens and hundreds of people who have already talked about Disney villain songs. Needless to say, there's a lot that's been said about this film, and a whole lot of overlap between videos and articles and everything that makes talking about stuff on the internet so much fun. Now, I'm going to do my best to cite what I can, but there is a massive conversation out there about this film with just a whole bunch of overlapping ideas. So in the interest of making sure that everybody gets a seat at this already very crowded table, and so that nobody gets excluded from the conversation, please take a look at the small dissertation I'm going to write down in the description with all the different links and references and citations and all that goodness. The goal is to make it look like the instruction manual for a Soviet-era fighter jet. Let me know how I do. Part 1, the Paris Uprising of 1832. I'm just kidding, I don't care about France. What I do care about, though, is when a film breaks the rules. Well, rules isn't a good way of putting it. Breaks the mold, but that kind of sounds a little fungusy. Follow me here. So when I say the structure of a Disney movie, everyone can imagine exactly what I'm talking about in lockstep. The kind of thing that Shrek made fun of. Something that more contemporary Disney movies try to poke fun at.
You can't marry a man you just met.
You can if it's true love.
Anna, what do you know about true love?
But how did we get here? Well, in the beginning, Senpai Ashman said, "Let there be light," and made the Little Mermaid, and all of the world's problems were solved all at once. Yay. But on a real note, when you look at a Disney movie, it's a distillation of a distillation. See, the musical numbers in a stage musical are the most emotional moments of the story. In terms of the characters, the setting, however you want to put it, this is the emotional focus. In that sense, the musical numbers in a musical hold the whole thing together, kind of like tent poles. This is where you can tell if a musical is well written or not. You should be able to tell exactly what's going on between the characters and the general gist of the story by just listening to the musical numbers of a musical. Otherwise, you've just made a play with singing, and we don't like that. That's how you end up with Glee. Okay, so that's all well and good, but when you're making a movie and you don't have 4 hours and a pee break to sing about the Swiss Alps, now you have to make decisions as to what musical numbers are the most important in the musical. You have to figure out which of the tent poles is the most critical to the structural integrity of the emotional core to this story, the load-bearing I Want song, if you will. But in all seriousness, this is what Ashman and Menken excelled at when it came to The Little Mermaid, which in turn began the Disney Renaissance. It was cutting out all the musical numbers except for the absolute most critical. This is why you hear stories of Ashman freaking out when an executive would want to cut a musical number, because he was already making so many sacrifices to meet a 90-minute runtime. So, when you look at one of these formulaic Disney movies, what numbers do they tend to keep? Well, you have the establishing number, it tells you about the world, but more importantly, it introduces you to the fact that this is a musical landscape, right? This is a musical, it's all magical, and these are the set pieces that are going to end up selling wine to alpha moms at Epcot. Following that, you typically have the Heroes I Want song, a song where they face the camera and yell to the audience exactly what they want. This gets our story going. Something hero's journey, something narrative theory, yay, whatever. But it makes sense. You want your protagonist to have wants and desires. Otherwise, you don't have a story so much as you have an animated podcast. At the same time, a lot of these films tend to have a more romantic lean, so you have a love song, yay, oh, it's so romantic. Then you might get a side sidekick song. And that sidekick song is either gonna suck water out of rocks or be the best song in the whole film, and there is no in between. Now, finally, and by far not leastly, really, you have the villain song. Now pay attention here because it gets a little tricky. I've brought this up before on the channel, but it is especially important to keep in mind. The villain song has to kind of thread the needle a little bit. Your villain has to be, generally speaking, less interesting or at least less relatable than the hero of the story. This is especially true for a film that's going to be playing on the background on Disney Plus for an iPad kid rolling around on an ottoman. So instead of giving the villain an I Want song where you're putting the villain on the same emotional intensity as the hero, you might get a more defining I Am song where they just sing about how great they are. Or maybe they just get a song where they tell a mirror about all their malicious plans. Now, to echo what a lot of people have already said about Hellfire, this is the first key point that you have to make. It's an I Want song. Frollo is singing about how badly he wants Esmeralda. So badly, in fact, that he's willing to have this whole spiritual negotiation about it. It's a big deal. But that's not without some really special context that needs to get pixie dust sprinkled all over this video. While not every Disney movie follows this model, a lot of them do. What that means is that when a film deviates from that model, there's all the more reason to ask why. So, for example, in Hercules, Hades doesn't get a villain number, which kind of makes sense. You have this idea that Hades is more closed off than Hercules, more duplicitous. He's been working on a plan for thousands of years that he's not going to scream for the whole world to know and have all his plans get ruined, right? Scar, on the other hand, doesn't care. In Beauty and the Beast, they managed to get away with merging the establishing number and Belle's I Want song. But in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, or The Hunchback of Notre Dame if you're one of those guys who likes to go outside or whatever, things get really weird. We get the opening number and it tells us the whole backstory, and oh my god, it is so sad that Quasi's mom is killed, and it's kind of cringe to watch nowadays because of the racial slur. Following that, we have a paired musical number, which is not a technical term, it's just something I made up, but it's gonna make sense. Give me a minute. Okay, the song Stay in Here, where Frollo tells Quasimodo to, stay in here.
Stay in here.
See, I told you. Immediately transitions to Out There, which is Quasimodo's I Want song. So, couple things. This is very, very loosely an I Want song for Frollo. It's more or less just him being the villain. Yes, he wants Quasimodo to stay inside the bell tower, but it isn't the primary thing that acts as his guiding star as he goes to sleep at night. For Frollo, it's like a general convenience, but it also serves as his motivation behind villainy for the context of Quasimodo's story, because Quasimodo wants to be out there.
Give me one day out there. All I ask is one.
See, told you. Quasimodo wants to leave the tower. Frollo wants him to stay here. Cool, makes sense, very clear, awesome. But this ties to a more general theme of the film. Remember that line from the opening number?
Who is the monster and who is the man?
Spoilers, but obviously this is all a play on the fact that Frollo is a celebrated official, but icky on the inside, and Quasi's really asymmetrical, but jacked AF. So there's an almost constant undercurrent of the dichotomy between Quasimodo and Frollo, and the important thing to keep in mind here is that these numbers emulate that. Stay in here and out there, equal and opposite. Then if we go in chronological order, the next number is Topsy Turvy. Super fun number, can't complain, but I don't have time to get into it here though. Then we get God Help the Outcasts, and God Help the Outcasts is fine. It's fine. It's a good song in its own right. I regret nothing. Let me land here because trust me, this song, it's a good song, but we're gonna have to just put a real big pin in that, come back to it later, and you're just gonna have to trust me. Okay, so after all that, we get Hellfire. Yay, and then the final number is technically the gargoyle song that everybody always forgets about. Okay, but back to Hellfire. It's not just Hellfire, because Hellfire is technically another paired musical number. Just like Stay in Here and In Out There. Right before Frollo sings Hellfire, Quasimodo sings Heaven's Light.
Was ever meant for heaven's light.
But again, there's more to it than just that. So, something that irrationally bothers me as an adult who has to pay taxes and votes is when people complain about Quasimodo and Esmeralda not getting together in this film, because that's the whole point of all of it. Like, that's why they made the movie, guys. And it's another thing that like Fight Club fanboys completely miss out on, and then people like to get really smug on Twitter, and then it's just like So when you watch Hunchback, like I said, there's a really subtle messaging.
Who is the monster and who is the man?
Super subtle, really easy to miss.
Who is the monster and who is the man?
Like, damn, dude, who is the monster? Is it the guy who wants to kill the baby or the baby? Either way, that's the story. Okay, when you look at the musical numbers, something really interesting starts to emerge. For example, there is no love song between Quasimodo and Esmeralda. She's singing to a church about what it means to be all pious and all that good stuff. Wonderful. But instead of what is like explicitly a love song, Quasimodo doesn't sing about love with a specific person per se, but like just how seeing people in love can be really rewarding in its own light. He loves love. Quasimodo sings about wanting to be out there and experiencing what it's like to be around people. He wants to break free.
We're breaking free!
No, not yet. I don't have enough gym badges to tackle High School Musical. That's for another time. But Quasimodo wants to be out there where the people are.
I want to be where the people are.
Man, it's almost like these movies have like a common theme because it's really relatable and it's what makes it work. Man, if I was going to celebrate the success of these films, I would totally not try to completely reinvent the wheel and ignore that. Anyway, so when we get to Heaven's Light, Quasimodo is singing about this kind of like altruistic joy he gets by seeing people be happy together. He literally calls it Heaven's Light. But the whole idea, and this is really important, is that Quasimodo has this very sincere love of love. Contrast that with Frollo. Yeah, he's stuffy and he just wants to maintain the status quo where he's at the top of the food chain, but by the time we get to Hellfire, it's clear that he has no interest whatsoever in respecting or even considering other people's opinions. The only thing that matters is what he wants. Going so far as to say that he's gonna get what he wants or he's gonna set someone on fire. That's the whole point of the film. That's why Quasimodo doesn't just not end up with Esmeralda, but it wouldn't work if he did. This is also why the end of Topsy Turvy has to be so cruel and why that's so important. It demonstrates that what Quasimodo sees in the lives of everyday people isn't in response to their affection or fear of him, because that's literally the only thing that motivates Frollo to go outside. Okay, so with that added context, looking at these two paired numbers, Stay In Here, Out There, Heaven's Light, and Hellfire, you could see this quadratic equation of emotions, this Punnett square of feelings and motivations. In Stay In Here, Frollo's basically showing the audience how he's going to be the villain. He's little more than a cop looking over a jail cell. But in Out There, Quasimodo's I Want song, he's screaming to everyone who will hear it about how he would be willing to trade anything and everything for just a single day on the streets of Paris. Counter that with Heaven's Light. It's not an I Want song. It's not an I Am song. There's no like plan to it. It's just a dude aura farming on top of a cathedral singing about how nice it is that his favorite ship is working out. Hellfire, on the other hand, is possibly the most desperate I Want song that Disney has ever committed to film. It isn't just an I Want song. It's the soul incinerating quest for one thing and one thing only. Otherwise, the city burns. So immediately, just in the layout and structure of how and where these songs appear in the film and what function they serve, you can clearly see the central theme. But at the same time, you can see how and why they deviated from the standard Disney model when it came to this film and demonstrating the difference between Quasimodo and Frollo. But the real gems to these musical numbers comes from what happens when you crack them open and see what's inside. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. And here we go. Genius! Perfect! Well, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. I'm just kidding. But really, those three notes make up the whole film. So take another listen to the main theme that opens the film. Now, if you listen closely, you can hear how it's a series of one single motif that's repeated over and over again. It's just this transposed up and down over and over again until it gets to the cadence where it follows a similar contour. That's music theoryinese for I'm really upset that this pattern doesn't finish the passage. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could look at the intervals between these repeated motifs, including this cadential figure, and you could see how the intervallic structures could be unfolded into this final figure, but who's really keeping track, right? It's not like it's going to be important for later or anything. Anyway, this theme could be said to be made up of several transformations of the same motif. Now, here's where this gets tricky. Listen to what Clopin sings when he's talking about Frollo.
Judge Claude Frollo longed to purge the world of vice and sin, and he saw corruption everywhere except within.
Yes, each individual note is repeated, sure, but if you look at the section right here, it's the same motif. This is what's known as a leitmotif. I know it sounds kind of funny coming from me, but leitmotif has kind of gone through the washing machine in terms of definitions. Nowadays, most people mean it to mean a piece of music that represents a person, place, or thing in a story, and that's totally fine. I use it that way too. But in a super strict origination of the term kind of way, a leitmotif is a motif that represents something in a story that then grows, mutates, and transforms to follow the contour of what's happening in the story. Okay, but there's more. If you look at the rest of this line, you can see an upside down version of the main motif, and then it again backwards. So when you're transforming something in music, you can just move it up and down. That's called transposition. But when you're doing it in this sense, you're keeping it in the normal form, or prime. If you flip it backwards, it's called retrograde. If you flip it upside down, it's called inversion. And if you go upside down and backwards, it's called retrograde inversion. So in this instance, you can see a prime and inverted version of this motif. In this way, you can see how Mencken is using transformation of this motif to construct new themes and ideas. If you continue the opening number, you can hear the Latin chorus repeat the main motif from the main theme at the beginning of the film in a few places as well. It kind of asserts that main motif and then the main theme by extension has that kind of old Roman Catholic power to it. Okay, now if you take our new motif, this purge motif, and keep that in mind, listen to Frollo right here.
Just so he's kept locked away where no one else can see.
Once again, you could see that overlapping combination of the main motif with each note repeated, just like that purge motif. This is a continuation of Frollo's distorted idea of piety. Everything that he does, he believes originates from that divinity. For all intents and purposes, he doesn't just think that he's right, but divinely justified. Even at that cadence, you could see a retrograde and inverted version of the main motif overlap. So in the opening number alone, you can see a tremendous amount of storytelling just in how Mencken chooses to transform and manipulate the musical material that he established in the opening seconds of the film. With that in mind, look at what Mencken does next.
The world is cruel. The world is wicked.
The opening of Stay in Here has a retrograde of the main theme. Now, something that's really interesting that Mencken does here is, since Mencken is repeating different versions of the main motif over and over again, you can see how there's all this stepwise motion. What's really cool about that is that you can rearrange the notes of the main motif into an ascending stepwise passage. And just when it seems like the motif is transformed too much to be recognizable, listen to this.
I who keep you, teach you, feed you, dress you.
That's the motif from when he was talking about Quasi being locked in the bell tower.
Just so he's kept locked away where no one else can see.
And this pattern repeats. The cadence here has two retrograded main motifs. But check out what happens when Quasimodo jumps into the duet, which coincidentally is my favorite TikTok sound of all time.
You are deformed.
I am deformed.
And you are ugly.
And I am ugly.
Frollo sings the main motif in retrograde. Quasimodo responds with it inverted, because they're opposites of one another. Remember,
Who is the monster and who is the man?
Now, what Frollo sings here is largely identical to the first verse, but listen to Quasimodo.
You do not comprehend.
You are my one defender.
Out there they'll revile you as a monster.
I am a monster.
As the duet goes along, Quasi morphs what he's singing slowly into an imitation of what Frollo is singing. Like right here, you can see that similar stepwise motion that appears in all of Frollo's lines start to appear as Quasimodo begins to agree with Frollo. It's kind of poetic. Frollo is wrangling Quasi's free spirit, and by the end, Quasimodo is sort of beaten into submission. But check out what happens as Quasi begins to sing on his own.
Safe behind these windows and these parapets of stone, gazing at the people down below me.
He's singing the exact same thing that Frollo was singing.
I who keep you, teach you, feed you, dress you.
At this point, Frollo is in his head. He repeats the same musical passage that Frollo sings over and over and over again until right here.
Knowing them as they will never know me.
And it's tough to figure out where that comes from. It's not quite what Frollo was singing, but you know, then he gets right back into it. But it's in a major key and it's an octave up. And then we get this.
And up there, living in the sun.
Well, let's try to figure out what Amadeus is doing over here. Yep, that's right. It's the same voice actor. I know. I couldn't believe it either. Okay, so what's going on? Well, if you look at these notes for a minute, we have to do music theory to it. And that means you have to stare at it until you hate yourself enough to figure it out. Okay, so here's how it works. If you look closely with an octave displacement, this is a rearrangement of the cadential figure from the main theme that really bugged me. I guess it all worked out for the better and I don't need to cry in the shower tonight. What that does is it creates all these huge leaps. Quasimodo is breaking free from Frollo's grasp.
We're breaking free.
No, not like that. I mean, well, Kind of. Okay, Quasimodo is freeing himself from Frollo's machinations, getting his voice out of his head. Everything with Frollo has this tight stepwise motion that ends up feeling really constraining. What we see here is Quasimodo pulling away from that and letting himself be free, while continuing to recognize that this feeling of elation comes from that source of divinity as represented by the main motif. This is his own interpretation of that divine power, free from Frollo's influence. As the song moves forward, there's more repetition of musical phrases from Frollo's part, punctuated with more of these massive leaps and statements of the original motif, or the original motif retrograded.
Heedless of the gift it is to be them, if I was.
Trying to track literally everything in this tune can be kind of a headache, which is the music theorist's way of saying that, sweet Jesus, please don't make me go back in there. But what we're seeing makes a lot of sense. Rapidly switching between material that originates from Frollo's way of thinking, and then moving to those huge leaps that's indicative of Quasimodo breaking free. But he's breaking free.
We're breaking free.
It shows that Quasimodo is creative and resourceful. He's using what he's given and adding his own twist to broaden his horizons to the best of his ability. Quite literally, he's building on what he knows, both musically and narratively, but also leaving behind Frollo's interpretations. Contrast that to Frollo, who literally sings the exact same thing that he sang 20 years before. Because at the end of the day, Frollo doesn't really grow or learn. So in all of that, we get a very musical representation of exactly what Quasimodo wants. He wants to get the opportunity to go out and form his own interpretation of the world around him. Moving on from that, we get Topsy Turvy. Again, fun number, but if we want to keep it under an hour, we can't talk about it right now. Then we get God Help the Outcasts, which again, it's fine. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Then we get the big show, Heaven's Light and Hellfire. It's actually really cool to cover Heaven's Light immediately after talking about Out There because there's a decent amount of overlap, which is kind of cool. It bookends the two paired numbers really, really well. Okay, just listen to that first phrase.
So many times out there, I've watched a happy pair.
It tells us a lot. The first half is a retrograde version of the main motif with each note repeated, followed by a prime version of the main motif, again with each individual note repeated. It's something you see a lot with Frollo, but at the same time, you can see Quasi moving away from Frollo's practices, building on his own ideas, using this original motif. It's just really cool to see. And like, listen to this part.
And kissed my cheek without a trace of fright.
That's the same as what Frollo says here.
Just so he's kept locked away where no one else can see.
But it's in major, and it's Quasimodo talking about how someone wasn't afraid of him. Those prison bars that Frollo has constructed in Quasimodo's head have been completely redefined. Quasimodo's broken free from Frollo's influence, and he can see the good in people. It's a wonderful cadence to Quasimodo's story. It's just really, really nice. And then we get to the piece de resistance. Okay, so now that we have all the context we're going to need, strap in, because this is a lot. So right before Hellfire proper, just after Quasimodo's done singing, we hear the clergy chanting, and I guess now's as good a time as any to cover this. So it's been a while since I went over Mass in music school, but just know that within the context of Western European music history, Catholic Mass is super important. So Mass is the part of going to church where Christians eat the Jesus-flavored saltine, and it happens every Sunday. But in the Catholic Church, there are different stages, like sections of the ceremony that all have their own little Latin prayer and whole thing. Where this became big in Europe was that different composers would set the text to the different sections of the Mass to different music. So for example, this instance of the Dies Irae has become something of a meme for the last 100, if not 1,500 years, but you also see a lot of the Kyrie eleison, which means God have mercy. And then you can also have what the archdeacon is chanting here, which is the confetitor or the confetitor, which literally translates to I confess. There are obviously many more stages to the Mass, but how Mencken set the text here is really important. So what happens here is that as Hellfire begins, Frollo is effectively just imitating the confetitor.
Beata Maria, you know I am a righteous man.
Which, aside from sounding like a transformer, talks about blessing the Virgin Mary and St. Peter and so on. So just as a side note, I really like the double encirclement here.
Of my virtue I am justly proud.
It's really similar to what Quasimodo sings right here.
Was ever meant for heaven's love.
On one hand, it's interesting because it's almost like a father-son kind of thing going on, but to some extent they're connected, but also draws emphasis on how they're different. Like where Quasi questions every being worthy of heaven's light, Frollo is overconfident in his piety. I think it's really nice. But for the first section of Hellfire, we see this imitation of the prayers. Frollo is more or less praying, and that slowly builds and builds with a lot of stepwise motion like we've seen from Frollo, until we get this.
Like fire, hellfire.
So And this is where things get really interesting, and it's going to sound dumb, but hear me out. Right here, Frollo is singing the main theme. It sounds really obvious to say it out loud, but think about it. With all of these transformations and motivic assemblies that we've been seeing, Frollo is the only person in the film to just sing the main theme completely unadulterated. If you look at the main theme as that representation of divinity or divine power, instead of channeling that idea into a series of transformations that better fit one's life experiences, like Quasimodo, Frollo's just sitting here screaming the main theme with no variation whatsoever. Instead of interpreting those rules like Quasi was doing, or even going back to things that he's practiced in the past that we've seen him do up to this point, right now he's playing God. Here's where the score really manages to convey what's going on. Quasimodo manages to develop and transform, while Frollo is set in his ways. Now, check this next part out.
It's not my fault. I'm not to blame.
We get this back and forth between Frollo and this internalized pressure from a kind of religious oppression. In effect, it mimics the duet that he sings with Quasimodo. Kind of like that whole, hurt people sort of thing. Frollo abuses Quasi in the way that he perceives the church and the divine to be abusing him.
Is the gypsy girl the witch who set this flame?
So, elephant in the room. I know this film prominently features a racial slur. I'll mute it when I can, but it's super awkward and just not possible sometimes. But right here, we see a similar shape to the motif that Frollo sings whenever he references Quasimodo.
Just so he's kept locked away where no one else can see.
Frollo believes that Esmeralda has somehow trapped him within the church's teachings, the same way that Frollo has trapped Quasimodo in the bell tower. To this end, the film is putting both of these characters in functionally the same place, with the same issue. They're both trapped, and they both need to figure out how to handle it. Once he resolves himself to his warped plan that he believes is 100% the proper way to handle it within the confines of the church, he returns to a similar structure as the prayer that began this whole episode, as if he's finally coming down back to reality.
Maria, don't let the siren cast her spell.
And then this happens.
Minister Frollo, the gypsy has escaped. What? She's nowhere in the cathedral.
So this is really cool, and I've seen a lot of people talk about it, but it bears repeating. The light from the door over Frollo's shoulder and the anonymous soldier represent a kind of divine intervention. But more importantly to us, Frollo stops singing. Now, if you haven't seen some of my other stuff, it's important to remember how musicals work. You talk until the emotions are too much and you break out into song, and then you sing until the emotions are too much to bear and you break out into dance. This is really important to understanding the language of musical theater. Now, typically, I really hate when a musical breaks up singing and has people just randomly start talking in the middle of the musical numbers. That's how we get Cats. It's a kind of emotional whiplash, like we're rapidly switching between levels of intensity. But here it's done on purpose to a really tremendous effect. In this brief moment, Frollo is visited by a divine agent and is giving him a choice that will set him free. Esmeralda lives and he can go on with no issue, but instead, he chooses to commit to his plan. He dismisses the soldier and goes back to singing. It's kind of like getting unplugged from the Matrix and then forcing yourself back in. I mean, the big tip-off in the score that this is divine intervention is that you can hear the main theme while this is happening in a major key.
Minister Frollo.
Furthermore, and this is especially important for someone like Frollo, Frollo doesn't really sing in this movie. Stay in Here is barely a number, and most of it is a duet. He gets a line or two in the opening, but it isn't even close to what Quasimodo or Esmeralda get. So for him to be committing to singing about all this feels that much more earnest, that much more intense. In Frollo's twisted mind, this is a kind of love song, and he's so infatuated that even someone like him has to break out into song to try and process those feelings of longing. And what does he sing when he does go back into song? He repeats the main theme.
Hellfire, dark fire.
Then, and I absolutely love this touch, we hear the Kyrie eleison, or God forgive me.
God have mercy on her.
This is the passage that plays whenever Frollo kills someone.
And for one time in his life,
Quasimodo, can't you understand? When your heartless mother abandoned you as a child, I should have known you'd risk your life to save that gypsy witch, just as your own mother died trying to save you.
what?
In Frollo's mind, he's already committed Esmeralda to her fate. And poetically, to mirror this in the music, he finishes the song with oblique motion, a lot of repetition on the same note. He's not moving, he's not budging an inch. He's committing himself to this dogmatic prison.
God have mercy on me.
There's also like this movement of a fifth and up an octave, and there's a lot of perfect intervals throughout the film, like in the cadential motif of the main theme, that like if you're a music theory nerd, then you know it has a lot of really strong ties to the church, especially during the medieval period, and that's just too much to go through. It's so cool. But that's Hellfire. Now, if you're thinking, hang on, we still have all this time in the video, he can't be done just yet, well, yeah, you're right. But I don't want to talk about the rest of the film. I mean, I really do. The underscore has some amazing moments, and I really encourage you to rewatch the film and hear them all for yourself. But there is clearly a piece of unfinished business to attend to here. You know how I was like really lukewarm on God Help the Outcasts? That's because of the credits.
Someday, when we are wiser.
This song is called Someday, and it was originally supposed to be the song that Esmeralda sings when she's taking sanctuary in Notre Dame. During the production of the film, some of the suits made the call to swap that number out with God Help the Outcasts, and Someday was relegated to the end credits. It actually has a more substantial part in the stage version, but if you listen closely to the film, this last-minute switch actually creates some problems. See, Someday was Esmeralda's leitmotif, and you can hear it every now and again whenever there's a scene about her.
How dare you defy me?
You mistreat this poor boy the same way you mistreat my people. You speak of justice.
Oh no.
In fact, this scene is particularly poignant. The song is all about how one day we'll all be wise enough to understand the injustices in the world, and being able to deal with them all appropriately makes a lot of sense for a film that deals with systems of oppression and opens up with this question.
Who is the monster and who is the man?
But if you listen, it is actually the first piece of music you hear in the film. No, not that. I meant this. Olim, which is what's being sung here, is Latin for someday. It actually means once upon a time, but come on, how cool would that have been, right? Okay, anyway, this is Esmeralda's song, her musical identity, translated into Latin and sung like a Gregorian chant. It's the very first thing we hear even before the movie starts. At the same time, Esmeralda is kind of a critical character in terms of the trials that both Quasimodo and Frollo have to face. They both like Esmeralda, but they have to reckon with the fact that it's never going to work out because she's got a weak spot for that He-Man bowl cut. How this all resolves is that Quasimodo is able to appreciate love for itself, and he's able to let it go. Not like that. He could just let go of Esmeralda and appreciate just seeing love out there in the wild. But Frollo wants to see her feet or set her on fire. No in between. That's why Quasimodo doesn't get the girl in the end, but with that in mind, take a look at the progression of the musical numbers in the film that were originally there. First is Olim, which is Someday, the opening number, Stay in Here, Out There, Topsy-Turvy also happens right about here, then Someday, then Heaven's Light, and Hellfire. Someday would have been in the middle of these four paired musical numbers, because she's central to the ideas that both Quasi and Frollo are challenged with in this film. So with that new information in mind, let's take a listen to this one more time.
They had a kind of glow around them.
Once more, really listen to it.
They had a kind of glow around them.
This is the main motif from Someday backwards, which is really interesting. You can kind of see how Mencken favors a retrograde transformation whenever he's trying to hide a motif. But if you listen for it, it's actually all over this number.
And as I ring these bells tonight.
But what's even cooler is how he builds off of this motif throughout the rest of the number, in the same way that he transformed elements of the main theme in Out There. If you look at this number as a whole, you can see how he's building off of Esmeralda's ideas. He's using her as an inspiration. At the same time, this motif is one of the few that doesn't seem to be derived from the main motif in some way, shape, or form. You can see how in moving through these musical ideas in the number, Quasimodo is working through how he feels. He was locked into a certain way of thinking, tried to break free, and as he was trying to break free, met Esmeralda. And while he likes her, he can accept that just having her around can bring a light to his life, something that he identifies as Heaven's Light. Frollo, on the other hand, Frollo is much much more disturbing. So the Beata Maria from the Confetitor and how Mencken scored it is really interesting here. It kind of looks like the main motif from Someday, backwards again, but it isn't. There's a perfect fourth here instead of a perfect fifth. You could call it a technicality, you could say I'm BSing you, but music theory is an art, not a science. That's why I don't bother with every single ornamentation. But having that Someday motif appear while the priests are singing about the Virgin Mary is super interesting, like suspicious almost, in a curious sort of way. Furthermore, this number begins with Frollo imitating the priest's prayer. But listen here.
The sun caught in her raven hair.
That is the Someday motif, sung backwards, with a characteristic repetition of each note that we see from Frollo as he's singing about being a righteous man, specifically to the Virgin Mary.
Or else let her be mine and mine alone.
At the same time, if you listen to the archdeacons in the background during this point, they're singing Quia pecca vinimis confetitione verbo et opere, which translates to, I have greatly sinned in my thoughts and in my words. The archdeacons are still praying, but Frollo is diverging from the prayer as he thinks of Esmeralda, but doesn't realize that he's doing it.
You know I am a righteous man.
The archdeacons are still praying, but Frollo is diverging from the prayer as he thinks of Esmeralda, but he doesn't realize that he's doing it. While all of that's happening, he's seamlessly transitioning from singing to the Virgin Mary to singing about Esmeralda. Throughout the film, he is so dogmatic that the music that he sings tends to be exact copies of what other people have sung. This number is no exception. So having this motif from Someday sneak in demonstrates how Frollo's dogmatic way of thinking doesn't really prepare him for a curveball like not being able to get Esmeralda out of his head. Instead of being able to be creative to find a solution to his new problem, his instinct is to dig deeper into a dogma that he clearly doesn't fully understand. That's how, in a way, he's confusing the Virgin Mary with Esmeralda in this kind of warped but really subtle transformation. Then we get this part.
It's not my fault. I'm not to blame.
But here's the trick. That whole mea culpa thing, which means my fault, totes my bad, is also a part of the Confiteor. This isn't just Frollo blaming himself for these feelings. This is literally what the archdeacon is singing back in reality. But Frollo can't tell the difference. He just hears voices condemning him. Even though it's just the next part of the prayer, Frollo is unable to reconcile reality with the tools that the church has given him. As he tries to figure out what's going on with his feelings, an enormous faceless congregation continues the prayer without him. And instead of Frollo praying to the divine, it's the church condemning him. That is, until Frollo figures it out, or at least he thinks he does. As Frollo figures out that clearly this is the devil's work and that it isn't actually his fault, and he's going to have Esmeralda marry him or die in order to keep to the rules, look at what happens as he gets that pressure taken off his shoulders.
Protect me, Maria. Don't let the siren cast her spell.
Both he and the congregation, instead of being in call and response, merge into singing the same line. He's figured out, at least in his mind, how to remain pious while also getting what he wants. Coincidentally, the line where he figures that out is also a retrograde of the main idea from Someday.
Destroy Esmeralda and let her taste the fires of hell, or else let her be mine and mine alone.
In this moment, Frollo is bending the rules of the church to match with his feelings about Esmeralda. Feelings he doesn't completely understand or recognize with tools that are completely incapable of handling them in a literal sense. Whereas Quasimodo experiments and transforms and does all kinds of things with what he has at his disposal to learn about what's going on around him, Frollo can't. He simply resorts to what he's always done, follow what he thinks are the rules in such a blind and rigid way that when some feeling or emotion that he doesn't know how to process or even recognize shows up, he bends the rules, either consciously or otherwise, so that his worldview doesn't completely shatter. And the only way to do that is to make these rash and brutal decisions, which ultimately necessitate forgiveness. And while all of this is going on, you can see how Frollo believes that he is both inspired by and commanding the divine.
Hellfire, dark fire.
This is what makes Hellfire such an incredibly effective piece of music. On one hand, yes, it is a villain song where, in context, it effectively communicates to the audience exactly what the villain's doing. Their motivations makes great sense. Yes, great. But it's also an I want song, and a good one at that. you know exactly what he's obsessing over and why. On top of that, if you really wanted to, you could even argue that this is what a love song would look like to someone as warped as Frollo. Someone so devoid of compassion, who doesn't know how to process these feelings and offer a counterfoil to the altogether altruistic nature of Quasimodo. But where this musical number really shines is how it manages to demonstrate exactly how Frollo thinks and why, where he confuses feelings for dogma, and how he completely fails to recognize the error of his ways. In the way that it's written, the audience gets to peer into the exact cognitive mechanism that allows Frollo to make these absurd assumptions that result in outright evil actions. In that way, the true genius of this song is how it shows us exactly how a soul becomes drenched in hellfire. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw here, be sure to follow me on Twitter, Twitch, and Bluesky to have your musical questions answered live. And if you really like what I'm doing, consider supporting me on Patreon. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give an extra special shout out to Ace Luke. I want you to tell me if my fear is justified that no one will pay attention to me if I'm honest about my addiction to ice cream. Anna B, Matt, Donovan Hodges, Ben Liebschwager, Ethan Rooney, Hayden Elza, Xavier FG, Karen Rosenau, Daniel Colquitt, Who Am I, Normal Names, Zerga Valley, Praylock, Jordan Adams, Christian, Alec Kulikowski, Mal, Emmett Hussman, Bentastic Mr. Ben, Myron John Tatarin, Adam Jensen, Rebel RMS, Carson Magus, John Egbert, Isa Bobiza Fififo Fiza Mimimo Miza Isa, Natalie Gray, Alex Klinker, Jacob Salas, Google it, Elise and Thomas Constantine, Kylo the Husky, Rick Osborne, Kim Coletta, Captain Casey, The Sporkmeister, Koi Seam, Always Posh, Gregory Holdiness, Cezanne, Myth Legdenic, Mike Wozniak, Nicholas Coent, Keltier, Josh Carias, Jason Kim, Tara Fimera, Looney, Anthony DiDonato, Abe Winterscheid, Ryan Vick, Tranthropology, Edith with the Man Hands, RM, Rue, the Vi symbol for Rue, I think. I Am the Pumpkin Queen, Sky Pilot, Fricky Poo, Hayden O'Byrne, Joseph Spiros, You Are Loved, You Are Valid, You Deserve to Live, You Are Not the Exception. Rah Rah Rasputin, Russia's Greatest Yeet Machine, For the Horde, Kaylin Hoover, Justin Harley, Hermes Quiros, Adam Geiger, I changed my name so that I could be a part of the fun, Simon 1, Micah Pham, Artemy, hey Artemy, Vox, Grovey LaPlume, Stephen H, Tabby, Don Marie Kieran, The Dude JB, I don't trust anyone who isn't honest about their addiction to ice cream, Rachel Augsburger, Tech Priest Melodious, formerly Take That, Raquel Monterosa, Basu Gasu, Bakuhatsu, Bakumatsu, Ride Between the Raindrops, Stupid Dog, Andy Muse, Michaela with no H, Huen Dui Dao, Kayla Patel, G-Chord, G7 Chord, G-Chord, Snaps, Justin Sargent, Sarah, Behold the Plasma Donut, Mo and Soy, Docos, Kobolds, Vic Larson, Joe Malloy. Since I got a chuckle out of Sideways last time, I'll be referencing him every 2 minutes because I am now famous and feel vindicated. Abby Rose, Korek, Hazel J. Hollick, Source 41, Stop! He who would cross the bridge of death must answer these questions 3. Ere the other side he see. TG Techie. Friedrich F., Brent Dubrock, Amaranth, Kipu, The Refracted Light, Scuba Doos, Literal Ghost. I'm here to learn about leitmotifs so I sound interesting at parties. Katie can finally afford Patreon. Roman Antonacci, Sebastian Canino from Cinemageddon Reviews, John Lavoie, The Carnian Pluvial Event, JC, Sir Toaster the 11th, 46, 6F, 72, 20, 79, 65, 61, 72, 73, 20, 49, 27, 76, 65, 20, 77, 61, 69, 74, 65, 64, 20, 66, 6F, 72, 20, 68, 69, 73, 20, 72, 65, 74, 75, 72, 6E, 21. Zach Chillman, Birch, Ali Sheenaberry, Small Panda, $100 million dress rehearsal. That's not a dress rehearsal. That's the performance. Ben Stav, Rachel Crown, Cecily Yeager, Tep Chan, The TARDIS Pig TC, Lord Tiebreaker, Maria Ice Bottles, Matthew Eastman, Rosalind Helps, 3 Canadian Geese in a Trench Coat, Jen Hogan. Okay. Wo Ta Ta Jiushi Xiang Tin Niu Do Wo Ming Si Ni Chao Bang XD. I'm so sorry. And that translates to, I just want to hear you pronounce my name. You're awesome. Thank you very much. Freyo, longtime lurker, Dr. Martin C. Wolf, Testitara, Kai, Sam Tudor, Blood Red Ruby, Ryan Mueller, Bradley, J, Honest Lyred, Judge the Pudge, Snooze, Apologetic Pasta, Grant Madison McKenzie and Paige Miller, Justin Kwan, Champion, Socrates Gavriel, Zachary Cross, Alan Lozano, Sebastian Barkley, Daniel Rafferty, John, Edward Franklin Woods, the other badass librarian, Maria Ferrari, Zalf, Hyde Hinnicky, Goddard Damarung, Lost R2, Cinemageddon Reviews, Venkat Subramanian, Kateri Baiting, Mrs. M, Adam Jackman, Hirsch X, Thomas Betraw, Not a Ninja or a Muffin, but a Ninja Muffin, Art of the Smart, Kyle, Thief of Elsewhere, Marzipan Googleplex, Ollie, Black Sea Ninja, Joe Despoto, Sonny Pumpkins, Gerald, Audrey McDonald's, Songs from a Suitcase, Trash Taku with an Angzar? Is that what that's called? Christus Lourdurage, Sean, Chris, Kylie McClanahan, Gregors, Bzezinkwints, Krazizinzawazisi, Poya Recolidi. Thank you, and I'm sorry, but thank you. Name subject to change. Sideways, your videos are genuinely my absolute favorite on the entire platform, and the hard work you put in shows, and your B. Oh, thank you. Nestor Notabilis, Mason Wren, Bomb42, Mary Rose Hastings, Jin, Bastian Westfall, Brennan Moore, Aaron Lotz, Coda, Tyler Kirby, DJ and the Walrus, Sam Perman, the Salter Harding Clan, Jasper Jackal, John, Big Kev 07, Carl Fisher, Madeline, Prospero, Kelsey Fink, Carter Forch, Michael Warford, Xerxes Jade, George Saris, Dave, Fizzleberger, Drew Weissner, Courtney Rail, Ethan Belmer, Serial. I want you to tell me if my fear is justified that no one will pay attention to me if I'm honest about my addiction to Sideways. The Deadly Ducky, Tessa Johnson, Zach Yeager, Sarah Wilkinson, Bomberman, Over, Sideways, and Under on a Magic Carpet Ride, and Jacob Starr. Man, there are a lot of you now. I thank you all so much. I really cannot express to you what it means that you've all stuck with me for this long and all this way. I literally could not do this without all of your continued support. It means so much to me. Thank you all so much. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching.